The management of grief by Bhararti Mukherjee is our today's discussion. This is a story in which we are talking about its claims, the number of characters and their roles, the summary and its Nepali interpretation as well, comments and readers review. Welcome to my YouTube channel Bachelor and Master English. Today we are talking about the management of grief by Bhararti Mukherjee. Today's discussion centers around those topics that I mentioned earlier, and here is the author herself and the story at a glimpse. This is a short fiction by Bhararti Mukherjee published in 1988. The setting is 1985 within a Hindu community in Toronto, Canada, and switching to India when Saila is at the retreat. The theme of this story is searching for identity, which Saila has to find in order to deal with the loss and pain. The conflict is between these two, those who are going to move on from the loss of her two sons and the loss of her husband in the plane crash. The climax is during Saila's retreat when she has a vision of her husband. The narrative and the point of view here, third person narrative in which the narrator reveals who Saila is through grief. Okay. And the historical context, real event, but the characters are fictional. Okay. On June 12, 1985, Air India flight 182 crashed and killed all 329 people on board. The reason for the crash was a bomb in the front luggage department. Religious Indian terrorists planted the bomb. And the plot is, the management of grief tells the story of Saila Babi, an Indian Canadian Hindu who has lost her husband and two sons in bomb exploded plane crash into Irish Sea. The clumsy intervention of a government social worker represents the misstep of Canadian government in the general handling of the catastrophe. Okay. Here are the characters. Saila Babi, she is the central character protagonist here, and Kusum is her friend and neighbor. Judith Templeton is a Canadian social worker, and there are other characters as well, but we have this list, and this is workable list. Okay. And here is a short summary, and with this short summary I have my own summary here. I am just telling you the summary here. The management of grief is narrated from the point of view of Saila Babi, a middle-aged Indian widow and an immigrant to Canada. She has recently lost her husband Bikram and her two sons, Vinod and Mithun, in a plane crash, thought to be the result of Sikh terrorist attack. The story opens in Babi's house in Toronto, now filled with her neighbors and fellow mourners. They have just heard about the plane crash. Babi has been given Valium to manage her shock, and she feels numb but not calm. She tolerates her well-meaning neighbors and commiserates with her friend and neighbor Kusum, who has lost most of her family in the crash. Only her wayward daughter Pam is left, and Kusum is unable to hide her disappointment in having lost her better behaved daughter. Babi is approached by Judith Templeton, a young Canadian government official, to act as a liaison and translator for a group of mourners. Templeton wants to aid the group in getting their affairs in order and moving on with their lives. She mistakes Babi's composed demeanor, brought on by shock and Valium, for true composure, and tells Babi that she has heard that She is a pillar of the community. Bobby reluctantly agrees to help Templeton while reflecting that among her own community, her calm effect is not a mark of maturity, but of strength. The title of the story comes from Templeton's conception of grief management. Her belief that grief proceeds in early stages and that is an emotion to be controlled rather than given into. Bobby and her group of mourners then fly to Ireland, where they must identify the remains of their families as the plane crashed near the Irish coast. The remains of Bobby's own family have not yet been found. She visits the coast with Kusum and with Dr. Ranganathan, another mourner who has also lost his entire family in the crash. Despite his loss, Dr. Ranganathan maintains an optimistic, pragmatic attitude. He suggests to Bobby that there is a possibility that some crash survivors may have been able to swim to safety, briefly filling Bobby with hope as her sons were strong swimmers. Dr. Ranganathan later accompanies Bobby to an interview with a police officer who believes that he may have identified her own son, older son, Binod. She does not recognize Binod from the photograph he shows her, though there is a strong likelihood that his features have been so distorted by drowning that she does not want to recognize him. The mourners then fly from Ireland to India, where they visit the families whom they have left behind in their migration to Canada and take up some of their old forgotten rituals. We play contract bridge in dusty gymkhana clubs. We ride stubby ponies up crumbly mountain trails. Bobby's wealthy and elderly parents are progressive and rational and do not believe in spirits or in mystical rituals. While at the temple with her mother, she is visited by her husband, a visitation that she hides from her mother. However, this visitation is a sign to her that she must return to Canada and take up her old life, elderly life. The other mourners in Bobby's group have meanwhile all coped with their grief in different ways. Kusum decides to remain in India and to become an ashram devotee. Dr. Ranganathan finds a job in Texas where he plans to tell no one about the crash, although he still cannot bring himself to sell his old family home. Once in Canada, Bobby meets again with Judith Templeton. Asked by Templeton to meet with a grieving elderly Sikh couple, Bobby fails to convince them that they need assistance from the government. She is also disheartened to realize that she is now suspicious of them because they are Sikhs. I stop now at the sights of beards and turbans. The encounter causes Bobby to reject both Templeton and the role that Templeton has assigned her. The story ends on an equivocal note, with Bobby having begun a new life as a widow and moved into a new apartment in the city's downtown. While she has in some ways followed Templeton's advice regarding grief management, she remains in communion with her family. In the story's final scene, she has what she describes as a last visitation from her family in a park in downtown Toronto. She then sets her shopping package down on a park bench and begins to walk off in a random direction. The first 2 pages of the story gives us the idea of Indian values. It becomes clear from the very outset, from the opening sentence, a woman I don't know is boiling tea the Indian way in my kitchen. From this story's analysis, it is evident that the storyteller depicts with much detail the grief and sorrow of those who have experienced this tragedy using such word combinations as monstrously pregnant, deadening, quiet. The atmosphere becomes more and more tense, and we can see that almost all these people who have come to help, Sayala wants to scream. In this part of the story where we also get acquainted with Ram, with Pam, Kusum's daughter, who stayed alive because her younger sister had fallen instead of her. Here we see misunderstanding between the mother and the daughter, as Pam is a westernized teenager, and that is the reason for their detachment. She is closer to Sayala than to her mother. In the development of action that covers the major part of this text, we can see Sayala's meeting with representative of the provincial government, Judith Templeton. Sayala goes to the coast of Ireland to look once again at the very place where the crash of the airplane jet took place. She is accompanied by Kusum and several more mourners who grieve too much but still have to identify their bodies. Here the atmosphere is very tragic. The mother cannot accept the reality, and she still thinks that she did not lose her family, because the boy on the photo does not look like her son, and moreover he is an excellent swimmer so that he can be alive. It is tough to be the witness of the tragedy of a woman who has lost her children. And then we come to know that Sayala decided to return to India, and there she understood that she had to go back to Canada. This is the climax of the story, that the management of grief. We see that the women had chosen the right way, though she is still not sure and wants to ask her family for advice. So this is a very beautiful story here, and this beautiful story tries to incorporate so many contents here, and this story really reminds the people how they can manage the grief, and how is it possible for the people to maintain their life, and how they can manage the people the life even after death. Okay. So here is short summary. Let us go with this. The management of grief is set following the downing of a jet plane bound for Bombay, India, into the Irish Sea, supposedly by Sikh terrorists. The plot revolves around an Indian Canadian woman named Sayala Babi, whose husband and two sons were killed abroad. Aboard. Kusum was a neighbor and friend who also lost her husband and a daughter. Sayala is approached by a social worker named Judith Templeton, who asks her to help her reach out to the Indian community members who also lost loved ones. Sayala at first refuses. Torn between her Western values and those of native country, characters struggle with cultural demands that they immediately remarry. Sayala is spared this because, having been married, she is no longer marriageable, and she has no interest at all either. Eventually, she does help out a Sikh couple who have lost their sons, albeit difficult because the terrorists were thought to be Sikhs. After this, Sayala refuses to help the social worker come to an aid of the rest of the Indian community. Okay. Now let us go with the summary in Nepali. Discussion in the Nepali. दुःखको व्यवस्थापन भारती मुखर्जीको एउटा चर्चित कथा हो। यस कथामा क्यानाडाको टोरन्टोबाट दिल्लीतर्फ आएको एउटा एयर इन्डियाको बोइङ 747 दुर्घटना हुँदा 329 जनाको मृत्यु भएको थियो र त्यसको असरबाट कयौँ मान्छेहरूले अब कति मान्छे अब बाँचेका जो छन् तिनीहरू घरमा उसको श्रीमान मरे विधवा भए, अब श्रीमती मरे विधुर भए, अब कति छोरछोरी मरे त्यसबाट शोकाकुल भए, कति अब बाआमा मरे त्यहाँबाट छोराछोरी टुक्रा भए, कहीँका आफन्त गुमाए। बडा यो चाहिँ सबै चाहिँ यो गुमाएको अब यस्ता दुःखका घटनाहरूको चाहिँ व्याख्या छ यसमा। यस दुःखको घडीमा उनीहरूले कसरी दुःख मनाए त, दुःखको चाहिँ क्षणमा उनीहरूले दुःखलाई कसरी व्यवस्थापन गर्न सिके, त्यही दुःखसँगै बाँच्न कसरी सिके। अब त्यो दुःख कसरी बाँच्न सिके अनि त्यहाँबाट उनीहरूको दुःख परेको बेलामा त्यहाँको सरकारले कस्तो खालको चाहिँ एउटा व्यवहार गर्यो, कस्तो कर्मचारी पठायो, कति कर्मचारीहरू कति संवेदनशील भए, अनि तिनीहरूले चाहिँ अब यी चाहिँ जो शोकाकुल परिवारजन छन् तिनीहरूलाई कसरी तिनीहरूसँग पहुँचमा पुगे र कस्ता कस्ता कुराहरू गर्न खोजे र तिनीहरूबाट चाहिँ त्यो शोकाकुल परिवारहरूको र तिनीहरूको बिचमा कस्तो तालमेल मिल्यो कि मिलेन। अब यस्तै यस्तै कुराहरू चाहिँ यहाँ कथामा भारती मुखर्जीले व्याख्या गरेकी छन्। यहाँ एउटा सरकारी कर्मचारी महिला छन्, अब त्यो जुरी टेम्पल्टन भन्ने सरकारले पठाएको चाहिँ एउटा खटिएको महिलाले अन्तर्वार्ता लिने क्रममा यस कथाको वाचक जो छ, अब यहाँ तेस्रो जुन थर्ड पर्सन न्यारेसन भन्छ तृतीय पुरुष को तर्फबाट भनेको जुन कथाकारले आफू कथासँग त्यत्तिको चाहिँ नजिकै नजोडिकन अलि परबाट आफूलाई चाहिँ त्यहाँ व्याख्या गर्न खोजेको त्यस्तो खालको चाहिँ कथा छ। यहाँ आफू प्रत्यक्ष भोग्नुभन्दा त्यहाँ आफू अलि पर बसेर त्यो अलि परबाट चाहिँ निहाल्ने खालको चाहिँ कथा यसरी भएको हुनाले अनि क्यानाडाको महिलासँग हिँड्दा पाइएका अब सांस्कृतिक भिन्नताहरूलाई पनि यहाँ प्रस्ट्याएको छ हैन। अब कथा बाचिका शैला भावी आफ्नो श्रीमान विक्रम र दुईटा छोराहरूको मृत्युबाट दुखित छन्। छिमेकी सहयोगी र खास गरी इन्डो क्यानाडा समाजका कोषाध्यक्ष डाक्टर शर्माले उनलाई औषधि सेवन गराई दुःख बिसाउने कार्य गरेका छन्। उनकै छिमेकी कुसुम भन्ने महिलाले पनि उक्त घटनामा आफ्ना पति र छोरी गुमाएकी छन्, एकदम मनपर्ने छोरी। त्यहाँको प्रान्तीय सरकारले खटाएको कर्मचारी सुश्री जुडी टेम्पल्टनले दुर्घटनाको पीडितसँग अन्तर्वार्ता लिई सहयोग गर्ने विचारले आउँछिन्। श्रीमती सायला भावीलाई नजिकै दुःख सहन गरिसक्ने अथवा गर्न सक्ने व्यक्ति ठानी अब जुडी टेम्पल्टन उनकै सहयोगबाट आफ्नो अन्तर्वार्ताको हैन अब अन्तर्वार्ता र अन्य गतिविधिहरू जारी राख्न चाहन्छन्। श्रीमती कुसुम भने भाग्यवादी छन् अनि उनी कस्ती छन् भन्दा उनी आयरल्यान्डबाट आफ्नो श्रीमानको मृत शरीर लिएर दाह संस्कारका लागि बम्बई आउँछिन् अनि त्यसपछि श्रीमती सायलाले पनि उसलाई साथ दिन्छन्। त्यसपछि श्रीमती कुसुम हरिद्वार गई साधु बन्छिन् र जीवन बिताउँछिन्, साधु जीवन एउटा चाहिँ र त्यसको प्रभावले अब त्यहाँ साधु जीवन बिताउँदै आध्यात्मिक हुन्छन् उनी र अनि त्यसको प्रभावले श्रीमान र छोरीसँग कुराकानी भएको समेत दाबी गर्छन्। त्यतिसम्म उनी आध्यात्मिक छन् कि उनको चाहिँ त्यो आध्यात्मले उनको आध्यात्मिक एउटा उनको आत्माले उनको मरेको श्रीमान र मरेकी प्रिय छोरीसँग चाहिँ उनले कुराकानी गरेकोसम्म उनले चाहिँ एउटा बचाउँदिन् भनेको एउटा एक खालको अतिशयोक्ति पनि प्रयोग गरेको छ लेखकले यहाँ। त्यो त्यस्तो सम्भव त हुँदैन तर चाहिँ उनले त्यो चाहिँ प्रयोग गरेको उसले दाबी गरेको कुरालाई चाहिँ यहाँ एउटा मान्छेको अध्यात्म अथवा धर्मप्रति कति चाहिँ एउटा लगाव छ त। अब जो मान्छेले आफ्नो मान्छेहरू गुमाएका हुन्छन्, सम्पत्ति गुमाएका हुन्छन्, यस्तो विकराल अवस्थामा आफ्नो चाहिँ धेरै चिज गुमाउँदाखेरि त्यो मान्छेको सान्त्वनाको बाटो आफूलाई चाहिँ एउटा संयमित राख्ने बाटो नै अध्यात्म हो। त्यो अध्यात्ममा लागेका मान्छेहरूले चाहिँ त्योसम्म चाहिँ उनीहरूले आफूले एउटा त्योसँग सोध्छन् कि जहाँ उनीहरूले पहिला आफ्नो मान्छेहरूसँग भेटेको अब एउटा मनोवैज्ञानिक कुरा पनि छ, एउटा आध्यात्मिक कुरा पनि छ। यहाँ मनोवैज्ञानिक पनि कुरा हुन्छ, जतिखेर पनि मनमा त्यही कुरा चलिरहेको हुनसक्छ, चलिरहेको हुनाले अब त्यही कुरा उनीहरूले गर्न खोज्छन् हैन। अनि त्यही मनमै जतिखेर नि त्यही सोचिरहेको भनेपछि सपनामा पनि त्यही देखिन्छ, विपनामा पनि त्यही देखिन्छ, मानसिक कुरा हो, त्यो मनोवैज्ञानिक कुरा हो। तर चाहिँ फेरि आध्यात्ममा लागेका कुराले त्यसलाई पत्याउँदैनन् के उनीहरूले त उसको आत्माले चाहिँ उनलाई चाहिँ एउटा कुनै शारीरिक रूप लिएर आएको र कुरा गरेको अथवा कुनै कोठामा कुनै त्यस्तो समयमा चाहिँ आएर राति अथवा त्यहाँ कोठामा गुन्जिएको घरमा गुन्जिएको चाहिँ त्यस्तो उनको कानमा चाहिँ त्यो सुनिएको मैले त यो सुनेको थिएँ नि त यो पक्का भनेर त्यस्तो खालको चाहिँ सोच आउँछ। त्यो के हो भन्दाखेरि अब कुसुमको कुरा त्यहीँ छ हैन। अनि उनले चाहिँ आफ्नो एउटा मरेका श्रीमान र छोरीसँग कुराकानी भएको दाबी गर्छिन्। कतिपय विदुरहरू जो चाहिँ श्रीमती मरेका छन् उमेर पनि छ आफ्नो, अब अर्को विवाह गरी बस्छन् भने कतिपय आमा बाबु छोरा जुन मरेका छैनन् होला, अब तिनीहरू मरेका छैनन् होला भनेर कति मान्छेहरू चाहिँ अझै पनि मरेका छैनन् होला भनेर कुरेर बस्छन्। एउटा कोही विधवाहरू हुन्छन्, अब त्यही जसलाई आफ्नो श्रीमान जो महिलाहरू हुन्छन् जसले आफ्नो श्रीमान मरेका छैन भनेर चाहिँ बस्छन्। अब हामीले नेपालीमा त त्यसलाई आशेराणहरू पनि भन्छौँ हैन। अब त्यस्तो आशा गर्ने, अब उसको मरिसकेको छ तर आशा गर्छ भन्दा त्यस्तालाई आशेराण पनि भन्छ। त्यस्ता महिलाहरू पनि धेरै छन्। अब यहाँ उनीहरूले चाहिँ फेरि छोराछोरी पनि आउँछन् भने कुरेर बस्छन्, श्रीमान पनि आउँछन् भने कुरा गर्छन्। तर यहाँ साइला भाबीको पनि उमेर अलि भइसकेको, अब उमेर गइसकेको हुनाले उनी बिहा गरी उमेर गइसकेको हुनाले उनी बिहा गर्दिनन्। कोहीले गर्छन्, अब कोहीले आफ्ना चाहिँ ती मरेका मान्छे बाँचेका छन् भनेर कुरा गर्छन्। साया भने जुडी टेम्पल्टनलाई अब कोही फेरि चाहिँ त्यहाँको आफ्नो एउटा सम्पत्ति चाहिँ त्यो ठाउँले एउटा पुरानो याद दिलाउँछ भनेर त्यो ठाउँको सम्पत्ति जायजेथा सबै बेचेर अर्को ठाउँमा जान पनि सोच्छन्। अब कोही ठाउँमा बसेका हुन्छन्, कोही बसाइ सर्छन्, कोहीले बिहा गर्छन्, कोहीले चाहिँ आफ्ना विगतका चाहिँ दिन सम्झेर फेरि तिनीहरू आउँछन् भनेर कुरेर बस्छन्। यस्तै सबैको आफ्नो कुरा हुन्छ। अब दुःखको व्यवस्थापन गर्ने तरिका हो त्यो। अब उनीहरूले आफूलाई चाहिँ कसरी नियन्त्रण गर्ने, आफूलाई कसरी आत्मसंयम राख्ने र बाँकी दिनहरू चाहिँ सहज रूपले कसरी बिताउने भन्ने सोच्दै जाँदाखेरि हुनु त भइगयो, तर बाँच्नु त पर्यो नि। बाँच्नेले बाँच्ने कसरी त, त्यो बाँच्ने तरिका चाहिँ यहाँ चाहिँ यो कथामा साइला भाबीसँग धेरै बाँच्ने एउटा चाहिँ तरिका रहेछ भन्ने कुरा चाहिँ जुडिथ टेम्पल्टन अथवा सरकारी अधिकृतले पनि थाहा पाएकी हुन्छन्। अनि अब साइला भने जुडिथ टेम्पल्टनलाई अन्तर्वार्तामा सहयोग पुर्याउन हिँडेकी छन्। यस्तो अवस्थामा छन्। अब एक दिन उनले आफ्नो मरेको श्रीमान र छोराछोरीले तिम्रो समय आयो, अब बहादुरीका साथ सामना गर्न तयार भऊ भनेर भने हुन्छ। उनले भनेको सुन्छिन्। त्यो आफ्नो श्रीमान र उनको चाहिँ छोराहरूले मरेका छोराहरूले त्यो भनेको उनले चाहिँ कता सुने भन्छन्। अनि यसको मतलब अब तिम्रो समय आयो भनेको तिमी यहाँ यो संसार छोडेर जाने दिन आयो, तिमी महाप्रस्थानमा जाने दिन आयो, तिमी यहाँ बस्ने दिन छैन, त्यसको लागि तिमी तयार भऊ भनेर चाहिँ उसलाई चाहिँ कता भने जस्तो लाग्छ। र तिमी धेरै चाहिँ पीडामा नबस, तिमी हाम्रो मात्रै सम्झनामा पीडामा चाहिँ तिमी धेरै बसिसक्यो, अब तिमी चाहिँ त्यो संसारबाट चाहिँ बिदा लिएर यहाँ आउने बेला भयो, तिमी त्यहाँ नबस, अब तिमी त्यसको लागि तयार भऊ, तिमी महाप्रस्थानको लागि तयार भऊ भनेर चाहिँ अब भनिसकेको अवस्थामा उनी आफ्नो जीवन यात्रा कसरी टुङ्गिने हो भन्ने थाहा नभए पनि एउटा महाप्रस्थानको यात्रामा अथवा अनन्तको यात्रामा उनी हिँडिरहेकी छन्। यसरी एउटा मनोवैज्ञानिक, आध्यात्मिक, एउटा के अरे सामाजिक, धार्मिक सबै विषयहरूलाई चाहिँ यहाँ चाहिँ लेखकले समावेश गरेका छन्। अब बहुसांस्कृतिक समाज जुन क्यानाडामा त्यहाँ अन्त मान्छेहरू जसरी बसेका छन्, विभिन्न समाजका, समुदायका, परम्पराका, धर्मका, आस्थाका मान्छेहरू त्यहाँ बसिसकेको हुनाले तिनीहरूको व्यवस्थापन पनि एउटा चाहिँ क्यानाडाको सरकारले गर्न अलिकति चुनौतीपूर्ण छ। अब उसले चाहिँ अलि त्यस्ता एउटा सशक्त कर्मचारीहरू नराखिकन, अलिकति पाका कर्मचारी नपठाइकन त्यस्तो दुःखको एउटा क्षणमा ती मान्छेहरूलाई सम्झाउनको लागि त्यहाँ जुन एउटा क्यानाडाका नागरिक भइसकेपछि त्यहाँका आफ्नो नागरिकलाई सम्झाउनलाई त्यहाँको सरकारले के गर्नुपर्ने थियो अलिकति व्यवस्था गरेको देखिन्छ क्या। त्यो व्यवस्था भनेको के हो, बहुसांस्कृतिकतालाई चाहिँ त्यहाँको सरकारले त्यति ध्यान नदिएको पाइन्छ भन्ने कुरा अब यहाँ भन्छ। यो अब त्यो चाहिँ अलिक गलत कदम हो क्यानाडाको सरकारको। यो चाहिँ एउटा बहुसांस्कृतिकता व्यवस्थापन गर्नको लागि चाहिँ त्यस्ता समाजसेवीहरू पठाउने भनेको एउटा चाहिँ बहुआयामिक कुरा हो। बहुआयामिक कुराहरू चाहिँ त्यसलाई प्रति व्यवस्थापन गर्न नसकेको कुराहरू चाहिँ देखाउन खोजिएको छ। यो जोस् दुःखको व्यवस्थापन सबैका आफ्ना हुँदो रहेछन्। कसैको चाहिँ दुःखको एउटा तरिका अर्काको लागि चाहिँ एउटा उदाहरण हुन सक्दो रहेछ। अब मैले चाहिँ एउटा प्रकारले चाहिँ आफ्नो दुःखको एउटा चाहिँ व्यवस्थापन गर्न सिकेको छु भने मेरो तरिका अरूको लागि उदाहरणै बन्न सक्छ, अरूको मलाई बन्न सक्छ। जसरी तसरी बाँकी दिनहरू आशावादिताका साथ बाँच्न सकौँ भनेर चाहिँ दुःखको व्यवस्थापन गर्ने हो। अब सबैको आफ्नो आफ्नो तरिका हुन्छ, जस सबैले आफ्नो आफ्नो तरिका अपनाउनुपर्छ र त्यो अपनाउनको लागि चाहिँ उसले चाहिँ अरूको सहायता लिन सक्छ, अरूलाई सहायता दिन सक्छ, अरूसँग मिल्न सक्छ, अब मन मिल्ने साथीहरूसँग बस्न सक्छ। अनि त्यसपछि अब कसले कस्तो कस्तो गर्छ सबैको आफ्नो आफ्नो हुन्छ। ओके, द्याट्स द डिस्कसन अफ द स्टोरी द म्यानेजमेन्ट अफ ग्रिफ इन नेपाली. Now let's go with the comments. The management of grief is a poignant fictional account of one woman's reaction to the 1985 bombing of Air India Flight 182. It was first published in 1988 in the collection of The Middleman and Other Stories, winner of the 1988 National Book Critics Circle Award. The Management of Grief tells the story of Saila Bhabi, an Indian Canadian Hindu who has lost her husband and two sons in the crash. In third person narration, Saila recounts the emotional events surrounding the event and explores their effects on herself, the Indian Canadian community, and mainstream Euro Canadians. The clumsy intervention of a government social worker represents the missteps of the Canadian government in the general handling of the catastrophe. In The Management of Grief, Saila describes herself as trapped between two moods of knowledge. Saila is a fictional character living in the Indian community in Toronto whose husband and sons were killed in the crash of Flight 183. Using the third person narrative, it tells the story of Saila Bhabi, a widow who has recently lost her two sons, Vinoda and Mithun, and her husband Bikram in a plane crash. It is based on a real life event, a Sikh terrorist attack on an Air India plane in 1985. Everybody on the plane was killed. Through the story, Bhararti Mukherjee criticizes the Canadian government's handling of the event, connecting their attitude of negligence and dismissal to the national policy of multiculturalism. The Management of Grief reflects the grief shared by the remaining relatives and at the same time narrates Saila's quest for identity in the third space after losing her husband and two sons in the disaster. This short story narrates a real terrorist attack on the Air India in 1985, killing all 329 people on board. This catastrophe is one of the worst air disasters of any kind by a number of fatalities. The Management of Grief is part of Mukherjee's effort to realize and broadcast that disaster and its meaning. It is a powerful short story of loss and recovery. We learn more and more each time we find another one to read. Serendipity brought this one to my attention now. Saila makes us feel her grief. It is natural that tears may well up in our eyes while reading. It is tough to be the witness of the tragedy of a woman who has lost her children. Unfinished duty and the necessity of hope are two significant themes of Bharati Mukherjee's short story, The Management of Grief. Throughout the piece, Mukherjee applies these themes by facing Saila Bhabi with depressing imagery that tests her strength. Saila's maternal drive to relocate her husband and sons is never relinquished, even when it seems logical to give up. The author uses the themes to express the loss and desperation of Saila and the grieving victims of the plane accident. Saila's belief and hope is the major theme of the management of grief. She convinces herself that Binod was skilled enough swimmer to save himself and his brother. Throughout the piece, there is a theme of unfinished business. She tells Kusum of this in her house when everyone is commiserating. The effective narration of the story allows the reader to put themselves in Saila's shoes. The title may be as simple as it seems, but it is a hidden treasure. This also shows cultural differences in view towards death. It is also interesting to know that people's way of coping with grief passes through DABDA: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. These are the 5 stages of grief, as Linda Paston has also written in grief management here, which is explicitly discussed in the story. To be honest, I thought it would just revolve around whether her loved ones survived or died, since their bodies were not found. I was right then, when I thought the story would also show how she could cope with her grief. But there are plenty of surprises the book has to offer us. At the end of the story, I was literally surprised that I had to read that part a few times again. It was a bomb, so I won't discuss any further. This allows what a great plot twist is. Narrated in the first person point of view, this story allows the reader to form a strong emotional connection to Saila, even if they have not experienced such a traumatic event in their life. It is very well written, a pity that these kinds of things happen in real life. So, in the third person point of view, the story allows the reader form strong emotional connection. The theme of this story may be observed in the title. The title here, the management of grief. That is why we can say that it is suggestive. The title is suggestive, it has symbol in it. The message of the story is every person is free to decide how to act in life. To conclude, let us say that Bhararti Mukherjee's story, The Management of Grief, is a tragic and melancholic story, but after all, it creates the impression of an open door. That is the optimistic note of the story. A person who manages the grief will never be alone. The title, The Management of Grief, encapsulates the plot of a story that is about how people, particularly the main character Saila Bhavi, manage grief, and yet it is ironic too. It is only when Saila gives up trying to manage and assesses her situation and accepts uncertainty that she is free to move on with her life. It is the story of how one woman copes and does not cope with the deaths of her husband and 2 sons in an airplane crash. The story tells us that there exists such grief that every person has to face sooner or later. It is the death of our near and dear people, people who represent all lovely qualities of life for us, people who are the sense of our lives. Judith Templeton here freely admits her own lack of understanding of the people she is trying to help. She has never dealt with a disaster of this magnitude, and she does not understand the Indian culture of the survivors. Okay, that is all with the interpretation or comments here. Let us go with the reader's review. The management of grief is a story that is true to life. It is a short story that account of deep loss. Bhararti Mukherjee responds to an 80s plane crash by sharing the story of Saila, who learns her family members have gone missing after their plane to Heathrow airport has split into two. She, along with her neighbor Kusum and her other families affected by the plane crash, demonstrate different coping methods and emotions that come to the surface in the face of loss. Grief is one of those experiences that looks different for everyone, and Mukherjee does a great job showing some of the extremes of this, including denial, spirituality, and the change one may see in others or themselves after a loss. The tone of the story's third-person narration is melancholy and subtle, expressed through understanding and detachment. This story read like a non-fictional piece, which I appreciated as well because it demonstrated a truly human experience in a down-to-earth manner. Although not explicit, there are cultural themes threaded throughout as well, that is, Indian families living in North America and facing loss in North America, and the cultural rift between Hindus and Sikhs at a time of writing. I appreciated these themes because they demonstrate a difference between how the East and West manage grief, which, by the way, the title is perfect. Regarding the rift, Mukherjee demonstrates that despite our differences, the ultimate loss of loved ones is a shared human experience. It made me consider how I treat others and what it means to be there for other people during the hard times. Okay, that's the end of the discussion of the story, the management of grief. I am sure you got the points. If you are new to my channel, please subscribe my channel, and if you think this video and the set of videos under this YouTube channel, Bachelor and Master English, are worth watching, please recommend your friends, and by sharing them, please let them talk and discuss about these videos. I need your support, I need your help, I need your contribution, I need your comments, I need your love, I need your care, and I need your companionship. I need your togetherness, friendship. Let us go together. Let us ride together on the journey of excellence, this academic excellence. That is what I am looking for. I am sure all of you accompany me, and please, if you are new, please subscribe my channel. That is what I would say. I would plead again. Thank you very much for your time and patience.